Most murders that occur on Halloween only exist as scenes in fiction. You may have heard urban legends about crimes perpetrated on this holiday, but the truth is far more terrifying. The deranged culprits cause irreparable harm to victims' loved ones and entire communities. Many of the slayings that take place on this already eerie evening have something to do with the celebrations around the festival. Here are some of the bloodiest Halloween murders ever. The deadly consequences of egging. Many people celebrate Halloween by throwing eggs at houses and cars. However, for one guy, this practice ended in tragedy. Karl Jackson, age 21, was allegedly attacked by a gang of young guys while bringing his girlfriend and her children home from a Halloween party in the Bronx. When he stepped out of the car to approach the guys, they opened fire, killing him instantly. Shortly later, he was officially declared dead. Teenager Curtis Sterling faced murder charges for his role in the incident. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail and is now located at an Ulster County facility. In a Halloween letter she gives him every year, Jackson's mom always writes to Sterling, "I'm glad you're still there." Tony Bagley murder. Tony Bagley, at 7 years old, went trick-or-treating with his family on Halloween night, 1994. Tony, leading his sister, aunt, and mother in a skeleton costume, reached the corner of the street by the next house. Simultaneously, a man in a hooded sweatsuit ran out onto the street and began firing at the Bagleys. A car was waiting for the culprit, he hopped in and they drove off. Tony's mother, aunt, and sister were all shot at but survived, he did not. The young child, a second grader, was shot in the head and subsequently died in the hospital. Police investigated a possibility that a family member who was not home that night was the murderer, but found no evidence to support the theory. Authorities were unable to pin the murder on a member of the family, and the crime remains unsolved. Love, jealousy, and Halloween horror. Peter Fabiano, a hairstylist, was murdered in 1957 after opening his door to a trick-or-treater. During their marriage to Fabiano, Fabiano's wife had briefly cheated on him with a woman named Joan Rabel. Rabel's jealousy was aroused when Betty Fabiano quickly dumped her female lover and went back to her husband. On Halloween, Rabel and another woman, Goldine Pizer, plotted Peter's murder. Rabel adorned a mask, gloves, and face paint as part of her costume. She also concealed a revolver in a bag of candies that she carried in a brown paper sack. The two ladies waited outside until the home was darkened. The next thing you know, Rabel was at the front door ringing the doorbell. As Peter answered the door, Rabel aimed a .38 caliber revolver directly at his face. Betty admitted to leaving her husband for a short time to be with Rabel when she was questioned by the police. After questioning Rabel, the police investigated the evidence. She was eventually caught for the murder once the pistol was recovered. A father's sinister treat. Timothy O'Brien and his father and some of his friends celebrated Halloween in Deer Park, Texas, in 1974. The lights were out when they got close, but they knocked nonetheless. They knocked, but no one answered, so Timothy and his friends without his dad went on to the next house. He joined up with them in no time. He had a handful of pixie sticks in his hand and said they were left over from the last house. Two of his own children were among the kids who received some. Ronald Clark O'Brien gave Timothy permission to have a few pixie sticks from his son Timothy's cache of candy that night. The child ate a few and was dead within an hour. The cyanide content of the pixie sticks was confirmed by the police. Fortunately, the other youngsters hadn't finished theirs yet. Ronald told the police that the poisoned candies came from the mysterious residence, but the resident there had a solid alibi. That night, he was not at his house. After discovering that Ronald had just purchased children's life insurance policies, police began to suspect him in the murder. He was intending to use the insurance payout to settle his more than $100,000 in debt. Despite Ronald's protestations of innocence, the jury was able to find him guilty of murder in a little over an hour. 10 years after his son's death, he was put to death. Macabre desires. John D. White murdered Rebecca Gay in her mobile home on Halloween night in 2012. White smacked her head repeatedly with a hammer and then wrapped a heavy zip tie around her throat. After watching some necrophilia pornography movies online, he decided to have sex with the dead body. But he was too inebriated to do anything about it. White stayed with Gay's kid, who was just 3 at the time of the murder, after the crime was committed. White gave the child to his father after dressing him in his Halloween costume. White admitted to the murder to authorities, leading to his arrest. White eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given a 56-year, 3-month jail term. A few months after his conviction, he took his own life in prison. Prison officials discovered him hanging in his cell and attempted CPR, but to no avail. Murders of Leslie Matsara and Adrian Insogna. In 2004, Leslie Matsara, Adrian Insogna, and their friend Lauren Mianza handed out candy to trick-or-treaters in Napa, California. The ringing of the doorbell subsided, and the 3 women retired to bed at approximately 11 p.m. A stranger came in through the upper window later that night. Lauren, who was sleeping in the basement, heard screams and realized something was wrong. She hid until everyone had gone to sleep before bolting out the back door and driving away from the murderer. Police spent a year looking for Adrian's killer before they settled on Eric Koppel, the husband of one of her closest friends. After police publicized details about the odd cigarette brand the murderer had smoked, Koppel surrendered to them. He admitted to killing the 2 ladies, though the public may never learn why. After pleading guilty in court, Koppel was sentenced to life in prison on 2 charges of first-degree murder. Because of his plea, he was spared execution. He gave up all chance of filing an appeal and promised never to make a dime off of the women's deaths. The tragic Lisk family murders. In 2010, Devin Griffin, then 16 years old, returned home to his family after attending church on Halloween to find an eerie silence. Then he discovered the bodies of Derek Griffin, Susan Lisk, and William Lisk, his brother, mother, and stepfather. Although at first Devin thought he was in a haunted mansion, he soon discovered his mistake. The teenager contacted his aunt, who in turn called the police. After investigating leads, police made an arrest that night, believing William Lisk Jr. to be involved in the murder. He was Devin's stepfather's 24-year-old son. William Lisk Jr.'s mental health was poor and he had a history of schizophrenia. He was arrested in 2004 on charges of assault and robbery after allegedly throwing a coffee cup at his stepmother and taking her keys. After he pleaded insanity, however, the accusations against him were withdrawn. Lisk Jr. pled guilty to the murders of his family members and was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of release. In 2015, he was discovered dead from a self-inflicted wound in his prison cell. The Toolbox Killers. During their time of torture, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris earned the nickname Toolbox Killers. The group got their moniker because they tortured young teenage girls in the Los Angeles area with commonplace items. Men would pick up women who were hitchhiking and drive them to isolated areas where they would rape, torture, and ultimately kill them. Bittaker and Norris would then transport the bodies to the mountains and leave them there. While the girls were being raped and killed, the males documented the events with images and audio recordings. The 5th and final victim of the men had passed away before Halloween of 1979. When Bittaker and Norris pulled up, they picked up Shirley Letford, a 16-year-old hitchhiker returning from a party. Letford was recorded while being beaten with a sledgehammer, raped, and tortured with pliers. Then, they dumped her body on the front yard of a suburban home, where a jogger discovered it the following morning. Norris's ex-con pal, who he boasted about the murder to, informed the police. The suspects were apprehended, and the media used to convict them was found. Norris admitted to the kidnappings and rapes, but not the murders. He placed the responsibility on Bittaker. Then Norris reached a plea bargain in which he agreed to testify against his co-conspirator in exchange for a life sentence. Despite having a death sentence, Bittaker is still alive and well today. The chilling Halloween disappearance and murder case of Maria Chilela. Maria Chilela, then 17 years old, told her father she was going out for Halloween that year and would be back at midnight. That night, a patrolman saw her walking along the side of the road and offered to take her home with him. Within 10 minutes, he came back, but she was vanished. It took over a year and a half for Maria to be located. A dead body was discovered in 1983 next to some bushes at a Burger King. Police visited the residence of Richard Bayegenwald, his spouse, and Darren Fitzgerald after receiving a tip. Even though both guys had extensive criminal records, Fitzgerald was the one who was apprehended by the authorities first. He led police to Bayegenwald's mother's house before pointing out 2 additional bodies. Both Maria's, who had been severed into 3 parts, and Deborah Osborne's, who had been murdered when both were 17, bodies were discovered in the backyard. When the trial for one of Bayegenwald's alleged 5 victims began, Fitzgerald was the prosecution's star witness. Prosecution witnesses testified that Bayegenwald killed just out of morbid curiosity. People on the Jersey Shore called him the thrill killer. After confessing to the killings of the 2 ladies whose bodies were discovered in his mother's yard, Bayegenwald was found guilty of both counts. Due to his cooperation with authorities, Fitzgerald only had to serve 5 years in prison. Bayegenwald died of natural causes in a New Jersey state jail in 2008, despite numerous appeals. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to watch more random history lessons.